When you ask a woman if she can do something impossible, she doesn't argue. She doesn't explain why it cannot be done. She simply listens to the numbers, nods once, and begins calculating the wind. What happened on that cold mountain range in the Himalayas would become one of the most debated moments in modern military history. Not because people didn't believe it happened, but because they couldn't believe who made it happen. A sniper team from one of the world's most elite special forces units stood at a base camp, watching their own certainties get challenged by someone they never expected would be standing beside them with a rifle. The morning air at 3,500 meters altitude cuts through your lungs like broken glass. Captain Sarah Hendricks had been breathing thin air for 6 days straight, and her body had long stopped complaining about it. What bothered her now was not the altitude, not the freezing temperatures that turned water into ice within minutes, and not even the supply line that had gotten delayed by a week. What bothered her was the smirk on Major Derek Walsh's face when he said those words. 4,735 meters, single shot. Confirmed, hit required. Sarah had heard impossible orders before. She had executed impossible orders before. But she had never heard a Special Forces major issue an impossible order as a mockery. The smirk told her everything she needed to know about how seriously, or rather, not seriously, he was taking her presence in this operation. She had been attached to the Special Forces unit for the past 8 months, having earned her position through a combination of stubborn refusal to fail and a skill set that exceeded nearly every standard within her division. But attachment was different from acceptance. In the circles of elite military operators, skepticism about women came disguised as concern for different physical capabilities and tactical considerations. Sarah had learned that translation long ago. It meant, we don't want you here, but we can't legally refuse you, so we'll question your readiness instead. The operation itself was straightforward in theory. A known militant commander had taken refuge in a compound nestled in one of the most hostile mountain regions in South Asia. Intelligence suggested he would be visible on the compound's western face tomorrow morning between 0700 and 0730 hours. One shot, one chance. The normal protocol would involve a full tactical assault team moving into position, but the terrain made that option tactically suicidal. Approach routes would expose their position to lookout posts stationed on 3 separate mountain peaks. Casualties would be inevitable. So the decision had been made to attempt a single-shot elimination from a distance that conventional wisdom called impossible. Enter Derek Walsh and his skepticism. The math is, he had said, his eyes scanning the topographic map spread across the worn tactical table in the base camp tent. Beyond our current capabilities, we're looking at a distance that requires accounting for wind variables we can't accurately predict, bullet drop calculations that push the limits of our understanding, and environmental factors we won't be able to correct for in real time. That was the assessment of a professional soldier. What followed was not. I suppose, he continued, turning to face the rest of the team, while deliberately not looking at Sarah, we should call in the long-range specialists from command. Sarah had been standing by the crate of ammunition, cataloguing their supply options and making mental notes about elevation angles. She had not been planning to volunteer. Volunteering was a rookie mistake, a way to show eagerness that got interpreted as desperation. But the smirk did it. The casual dismissal of her presence combined with the implicit suggestion that they would need to call in outside help when she was already standing there, already qualified, already proven. The smirk did it. I'll take the shot, she said. The tent went quiet. The kind of quiet that happens in movies but rarely happens in military operations, where men are constantly communicating, confirming, cross-checking information. But this quiet was real. It had weight. Derek turned to look at her, and the smirk expanded into a full smile. The kind of smile that preceded a punchline. Captain Hendricks, he said slowly, as if addressing a soldier who had just suggested attacking the compound with a knife. Do you understand what you're volunteering for? Yes, sir, she replied. Her voice remained level, professional, stripped of any emotion that might be misinterpreted as doubt or bravado. 4,735 meters, single shot, confirmed hit required. The weapon systems we have available aren't designed for that distance, he continued. The margin for error is measured in millimeters. The wind calculations alone will require constant monitoring and adjustment. There are variables we literally cannot predict with precision at that range. Sarah had done the calculations in her head already. The distance was extreme, yes, But it was not mathematically impossible. Extreme, demanding, requiring perfect execution of every single variable in the chain, from trigger pull to impact, all of that was true. But impossible? She had learned early in her career that impossible was a word people used when they hadn't done the math. "I'll need the Barrett M17 with the custom rifling you brought in last month," she said, moving toward the tactical map and pointing to the location where she would need to position herself. "I'll also need the wind meter, the ballistics computer, and I'll need someone assigned to track the wind shifts every 30 seconds starting at 0600 hours tomorrow." "You understand that the target window is only 30 minutes wide," Derek said. "If you're not in position by 0600, if you don't have eyes on the target by 0715, we miss our window. And if we miss our window, this entire operation gets stood down and restaged, which means we're back to square one with a militarized approach that costs lives and resources." "I understand, sir. And you're confident?" The question was posed as if he were asking whether she was confident she could spell her own name. Sarah turned away from the map and looked directly at him. This was the moment that would define how the rest of this operation would proceed. If she hedged her bets, if she expressed doubt or caution, he would use it as justification to pull her from the assignment. And more importantly, if she showed any uncertainty now, she would be questioning her own judgment when the moment came to execute. Doubt was a luxury she could not afford at 4,735 meters. "Confident enough to make the shot," she said. "That's all that matters." Derek's smile faded, and something else moved across his face. Not respect exactly. That would come later, if it came at all. But perhaps recognition. Recognition that she was not going to be dismissed, that she was not going to fold under the pressure of his skepticism, and that she was already committing to an outcome that would either validate her or confirm every doubt he had ever held about her presence in the unit. The rest of the evening was consumed with preparation. Sarah moved through the process with mechanical precision, understanding that every action now would compound into either success or catastrophic failure when the moment arrived. The Barrett M107 was already in the camp, a beautiful and terrible instrument of precision that could launch a .50 caliber round with enough force to penetrate through multiple barriers and maintain accuracy at distances that made conventional thinking seem quaint. She began by field stripping the weapon, familiarizing herself with the exact tolerances and mechanical response of this particular rifle. Weapons, even weapons made by the same manufacturer with identical specifications, had personalities. They had quirks. The bolt could be slightly stiffer in one rifle compared to another. The trigger brake could vary by fractions of a gram. The muzzle brake could have manufacturing variations that affected how the gas escaped and pushed the weapon into slightly different trajectories. Sarah had learned that different shooters had different relationships with weapons. Some operators would grab a rifle and simply fire it, trusting that their skill would compensate for any variation in the mechanical systems. Sarah had never been that kind of shooter. She treated the weapon as a partner in a conversation that had only one acceptable outcome. She needed to understand exactly how this rifle wanted to be shot. By midnight, she had fired 30 rounds of practice ammunition into the test range set up behind the camp. The wind had died down to almost nothing, which was simultaneously helpful and dangerous. Helpful because the baseline measurements would be clean. Dangerous because it meant the wind situation tomorrow would be unpredictable and dramatic in its shifts. Mountain wind in these regions did not move in gentle waves. It moved in sudden gusts, in updrafts from the valleys below, in downdrafts from the peaks above, all of it influenced by temperature gradients that changed minute by minute. Each of the 30 practice rounds had struck within a margin that satisfied her. At 4,735 meters, a margin of 3 inches could mean the difference between a confirmed hit and a miss that ended the operation. Her practice grouping was tight enough that she was confident about the weapon's behavior. What she could not be confident about was what the mountain would do tomorrow. Derek found her sitting outside her tent at 0300 hours, the ballistics computer on her lap, running calculations against weather projections and wind data that had been gathered from the region over the past 5 years. He sat down beside her without asking permission, a breach of protocol that suggested either significant rank confidence or significant doubt. "You know you're about to do something that will either make your career or end it," he said. "Yes, sir. And you're still confident?" Sarah did not look up from the computer screen. "Confident and aware are not the same thing, sir." "I'm aware of the variables. I'm aware of the stakes. Confidence is just what it sounds like when awareness gets converted into action. That's a good distinction, he said. It was the first statement he had made that was not designed to undermine her. What makes you different from every other shooter we have in this unit? I'm willing to believe in the math, Sarah said. A lot of people talk about precision shooting like it's an art. It is an art, but it's also a science. And the science says that at 4,735 meters, if every variable is executed correctly, the round will hit the target. So I don't sit here wondering if it's possible. I sit here running the math to make sure I execute it correctly. Derek was quiet for a long time. In the distance, the mountains seemed to breathe in the darkness, their shadows shifting with the movement of distant stars. Finally, he spoke again. If you make this shot, he said, the entire tactical doctrine in this command is going to change. Some people will be excited about that. Some people will be threatened by it. And a significant number of people will attribute your success to luck rather than skill. I know, sir. Does that bother you? Does that bother you? Sarah closed the ballistics computer and looked up at the sky. From this altitude, at night, away from significant light pollution, the universe revealed itself in the way it must have looked to humans before cities existed. The Milky Way stretched across the darkness like a river of light, ancient and immense and indifferent to the dramas of individual human beings. What bothers me, she said, is the idea that I might not try because I'm worried about how people will interpret the results. If the shot succeeds, people will say what they want to say. If it fails, people will say what they want to say. The only variable I can actually control is whether I execute the shot with everything I have. So that's what I'm going to do. Derek stood up, and for just a moment the smirk returned. But it was different now. It was the smirk of someone who had been wrong about something and had just realized it. Not a concession exactly, more like a moment where skepticism ran up against something solid and had to make a choice about which way to lean. Get some sleep, he said. We move to the sniper position at 0430 hours. You'll need the rest. But Sarah did not sleep. She knew her mind well enough to understand that sleep would not come and that fighting for it would only create tension that would serve her poorly. Instead, she sat with the ballistics computer. She reviewed the wind projections. She visualized the morning sequence dozens of times, and she trained her mind to move through the execution with the certainty of someone who had already lived through the moment and knew exactly how it would unfold. When dawn came, Sarah was already awake and ready. The team moved out from the base camp in silence, equipped with weapons and gear that represented tens of millions of dollars in technological innovation and military doctrine. They moved like ghosts through the mountain passes. 8 operators plus Sarah, plus Derek, plus 3 additional support personnel needed to manage communications and backup tactical options. The sniper position had been selected based on geographical analysis and intelligence about the target's movement patterns. It sat on a ridge that would give Sarah line of sight to the compound's western face. It was also exposed, which meant that if the target's security team discovered their position, they would be in a gunfight in terrain where defensive advantages were minimal. But that was not Sarah's concern right now. All of her attention had narrowed down to one thing: the shot. By 0630 hours, she was in position. The rifle was mounted on the bipod, angled slightly upward toward the compound that sat across a valley at a distance that made it look small and distant through the scope. Derek lay beside her with the wind meter and the observation equipment, feeding her constant data about wind speed, wind direction, temperature shifts, and any variations in the atmospheric conditions. Wind is coming from the northwest at 3 miles per hour, Derek reported. Temperature is stable at -4 Celsius. Sarah made the adjustments to the rifle's scope, correcting for wind and elevation. Each adjustment was precise, measured in minute fractions of a degree. The mathematics of long-range shooting was beautiful in its way, a pure expression of physics applied to the challenge of propelling a projectile across impossible distances and having it arrive exactly where it needed to arrive. At 0710 hours, the target appeared on the western face of the compound. Sarah recognized him from the photographs that had been distributed to the team. He was standing on a small platform, reviewing something on a document held by one of his security personnel. He was right on schedule, right where the intelligence had predicted he would be. This was the moment. Derek lay beside her, completely still, completely professional, completely present for what was about to happen. Wind is holding steady at 2.7 miles per hour northwest. Temperature is down to -5 Celsius. You're clear to fire. Sarah took a breath. She had taken this breath 1,000 times before, on rifle ranges, in simulation, in training exercises. but she had never taken it at this distance, with these stakes, with an outcome that would alter the trajectory of her entire military career. The world contracted. Everything except the moment disappeared. There was no Derek, no team, no operation, no future consequences. There was only Sarah and the rifle and the target that needed to be eliminated from 4,735 meters away. She chambered around. The mathematics of the shot had been rehearsed in Sarah's mind so many times that the calculations had become something more than conscious thought. They had become intuition. She understood at a molecular level what needed to happen. A .50 caliber round leaving the Barrett M107 at approximately 2,800 feet per second would begin its journey toward a target that was nearly 3 miles away. Over that distance, gravity would pull the projectile down approximately 480 inches. Wind would push it sideways, the exact amount depending on those constant measurements that Derek was feeding her every 5 seconds. The trigger had a break point of approximately 4 pounds of pressure. She had tested it, understood it, felt it. Her finger rested against the metal curve, separated from the trigger guard by only the smallest space. Everything was ready. Everything was prepared. But Sarah had learned long ago that there was a difference between being ready and being present for the moment that demanded everything. She exhaled slowly. This was the technique that every precision shooter in the world understood. You did not hold your breath while taking a long-range shot. The oxygen deprivation would create subtle movements in your body that would translate into microscopic variations in weapon position. Instead, you exhaled, creating a moment where your body was stable and still, and in that moment of stillness you moved the trigger through its breakpoint. The rifle fired. The sound was enormous, a physical thing that pushed against her body like a shockwave. The .50 caliber round left the muzzle at a velocity that made conventional thinking seem quaint. The recoil was substantial but manageable, something her body had been trained to absorb through proper positioning and the mechanical systems built into the weapon. But the moment the round left the barrel, it was beyond her control. Sarah understood this. In movies, snipers watched their targets fall and received some kind of satisfaction or confirmation in the moment. Reality was different. Once the round was fired, it was subject to gravity and wind and atmospheric conditions that no amount of will or intention could modify. She had done everything in her power. The rest was mathematics and chance. Derek was already measuring the impact point. His eye was tight against the observation scope, watching the exact location where the round had impacted. For a moment, there was no sound from him except his breathing. "Impact," he said quietly. His voice had changed. The skepticism was gone, replaced by something that sounded like professional assessment. "Direct hit, target is down." But Sarah did not celebrate. She had been trained to never celebrate in the field. Celebration was a luxury that came later, after the operation was complete, after extraction was confirmed, after all the variables had settled into confirmed success. Right now, there was still the possibility of return fire. There was still the possibility that the target security team would determine where the shot had originated from and begin returning fire. There was still the possibility that the operation would dissolve from a successful assassination into a complicated firefight with no tactical advantage. "Confirm visual," she said to Derek. He adjusted his scope, confirming the target's position on the compound's western face. "Target is confirmed deceased. No signs of response from security personnel." It's possible they haven't realized yet what's happened. They might be looking for the sound of the impact, not the sniper position. "How long until they figure it out?" Sarah asked. 90 seconds, maybe 2 minutes.
"We need to move now."
Sarah was already breaking down the rifle, preparing it for transport. The Barrett could be disassembled and packed into its carrying case in under 5 minutes by someone who had done it 1,000 times. She had. Her hands moved with the automatic precision of training, the rote memory of motions that had been repeated until they became as natural as walking. "Pack moving," Derek said into his radio, alerting the rest of the team that extraction would commence immediately. The protocol was established. The sniper team would move off the ridge into a pre-planned route that led through a series of valleys that would provide maximum cover from potential pursuit. The supporting team would establish a perimeter to prevent any hostile approach from the compound's security personnel. Sarah and Derek moved down the ridge with speed that was balanced against safety. The terrain was rocky, steep, and unforgiving. A single misstep could mean a broken ankle, and a broken ankle in this location meant a casualty that would have to be extracted under fire, which would compromise the entire operation. But they had trained for this. Sarah had trained for this. Her body understood the geography now, understood the exact length of her stride that would carry her down the slope without wasting movement or creating dangerous impacts on her knees and ankles. Derek was beside her, moving with the same precision, maintaining awareness of their surroundings, and monitoring the radio communications from the rest of the team. The compound did not respond immediately. For the first 4 minutes of their movement down the ridge, there was silence. Then Derek's radio came alive with the first sign that the target security team had realized something significant had happened. "Contact at the compound," the team leader reported. "Security forces mobilizing. They're setting up defensive positions and beginning to fan out in search patterns." "How many?" Derek asked. "Estimate 12 to 15 armed personnel. They're moving in 2 teams, one heading north, one heading east." "Good," Derek said. The callousness was not cruelty, it was tactics. The compound security forces were moving away from the sniper team's extraction route, which meant the path ahead was temporarily clear. "Continue to monitor their movement and alert us to any course changes." The sniper team continued moving. They had trained for this too, the idea that a successful shot would trigger a response, that the target's elimination would create a chain reaction of events that would require careful navigation and constant adaptation. But the team had planned for this. There were contingencies, there were alternative routes, there were communication protocols that would allow them to respond to changing conditions without losing coordination. By the time Sarah and Derek reached the predetermined rally point, where the rest of the sniper team and the support personnel were establishing a temporary holding position, the initial shock of the target's death had evolved into a wider search pattern. The compound security forces were deploying in directions that suggested they were trying to triangulate where the shot had originated from, but the terrain worked against them. The distance between the sniper position and the compound meant that acoustic triangulation would be difficult, the echo of the shot bouncing off mountains in ways that created false positives and misleading data points. "Extraction is arranged for 0900 hours, the team leader informed Derek. "Helicopter will arrive at the designated LZ in the canyon, 2 clicks from our position. We'll need to move in 30 minutes. 2 kilometers across terrain like this, carrying equipment, maintaining security, ready to engage if the target's security forces moved in a direction that intersected their path. It was standard operating procedure, but it was also the part of the operation where things could still go wrong." "How's the leg?" Derek asked Sarah as they took a moment to drink water and catch their breath. She had taken a fall 3 days ago during the approach to the sniper position, a slip on loose rock that had resulted in a mild sprain of her left ankle. It was not serious enough to remove her from the operation, but it was serious enough to complicate movement. "It'll hold," Sarah said. "Not much choice anyway." "You're not wrong about that," Derek replied. There was a pause. Then he said, "That was an incredible shot." "It was a mathematical execution," Sarah corrected. "The math is what was incredible. I just implemented it." "That's not modesty," Derek said. "That's accuracy. Which I suppose makes sense given what you just did. There was work to be done, movements to execute, security to maintain." The team moved as a unit toward the extraction point, maintaining awareness of their surroundings and monitoring radio communications from the helicopter that was en route to provide extraction. The extraction zone was a narrow canyon that opened up enough to allow a helicopter to land, but barely. The margins for error were minimal. One pilot with perfect precision could land and extract a team. One pilot who was slightly off could clip a rotor blade on the canyon wall and turn the extraction into a catastrophe. Sarah had been extracted by helicopter before. She understood the controlled chaos of it, the way the noise became so overwhelming that communication had to be reduced to hand signals and intuitive response. She understood that no matter how well planned an extraction was, there was always an element of uncontrolled risk, because helicopters operating in mountain canyons were subject to wind patterns that created unpredictable lift characteristics. When the helicopter arrived, it was exactly on time. The pilot was good. Sarah could see that in the way he approached the landing zone with measured precision, keeping his aircraft level despite the wind shear coming off the canyon walls. The team moved toward the aircraft as soon as the skids touched the ground, maintaining security position even as they boarded, because the extraction zone was still exposed until they were airborne and had distance between themselves and any potential pursuit. Sarah was the last one to board. She turned back once, looking at the mountains where she had just executed a shot from a distance that most military personnel had considered impossible. The compound was not visible from here, hidden by ridgelines and distance, but she could see the general direction, could imagine the confusion and investigation that would be happening right now as the target's security forces tried to understand what had happened. The helicopter lifted off and the mountains fell away below her. The extraction had been successful. The operation was complete. The target had been eliminated. And from this point forward, nothing in her military career would be quite the same. Back at the base camp, the debriefing began immediately. Sarah and Derek provided full reports on the execution of the shot, the environmental conditions, the variables that had been accounted for, the methodology that had led to a successful hit from 4,735 meters. The command staff listened with expressions that moved through skepticism to astonishment to professional appreciation. One officer, a colonel who had been skeptical about the entire operation from its conception, asked the question that everyone was thinking. Can anyone else in this command make that shot? But that's not the real question. The real question is whether the shot itself is reproducible. And the answer to that is yes. The distance is extreme. The variables are significant. But the mathematics is established. Once the technique is documented, other shooters can be trained to execute it. And do you believe that's something this command should prioritize? The colonel asked. Sarah thought about the smirk on Derek's face when he had issued the initial challenge. She thought about the months of skepticism and questions about her presence in the unit. She thought about the moment when she had chambered the round and the calculations had become action. I believe, she said, that any capability that can save lives and reduce the need for larger military operations should be prioritized. Whether it's me or someone else who makes the shot doesn't matter. What matters is that the shot was made. That night, Sarah sat alone in her tent, reviewing the entire operation from beginning to end. The planning, the preparation, the execution, the extraction. Every single moment that had led to the moment when she chambered a round and the world had contracted to the size of a single mathematical problem that needed solving. Derek appeared at the entrance to her tent without announcing himself. It was a breach of protocol, a suggestion that the normal rules had changed now that the operation was complete. The video of the impact analysis has been sent to command, he said. They're confirming the kill from a separate analysis of the target location. You made the shot. The math worked. The impossible became possible. The math was always possible, Sarah said. The challenge was believing in it enough to try. Derek smiled then, and it was a genuine smile, stripped of the skepticism that had defined his previous expressions. I wanted you to fail, he said. I won't insult you by pretending that wasn't true. I thought the shot was impossible, and I thought you were overconfident to believe otherwise. I was wrong about both of those things. Does this mean I'm accepted into the unit now? Sarah asked. You were always accepted into the unit, Derek replied. What you did today was earn my respect. That's a different thing entirely. And it's worth more, I think. After he left, Sarah sat in the darkness of her tent and allowed herself to feel what she had been suppressing since the moment the round had left the barrel. Relief. Satisfaction. The knowledge that she had been right about the mathematics and right about her ability to execute it. Tomorrow, she would be humble about what she had accomplished. Tomorrow, she would work to ensure that the methodology was documented and could be taught to other operators. Tomorrow, the normal routines of military life would resume. But tonight, in the privacy of her tent, on a mountain at an altitude where the air was thin and the stars seemed close enough to touch, Sarah allowed herself to smile. The impossible had become real, and she had made it happen. 3 weeks after the operation, Sarah sat in a conference room on a military base that was so secure that the exact location could not be discussed in any official communication. The room was filled with people who had never been in the field, who had never felt their hands shake as they loaded a weapon they might have to use, who had never tasted the fear that comes with knowing that your next decision might result in someone's death. But these people had power. They had the authority to shape doctrine, to determine which capabilities would be funded, to decide the trajectory of a military operation's future development. Colonel James Matthews sat at the head of the table, reviewing the ballistics analysis of the shot for what was probably the 100th time. He had been the commanding officer who had authorized the operation, but he had not been there to witness the execution. He was experiencing it now through reports and analysis and video footage of the impact assessment. Sarah could see the moment when the data coalesced into full understanding, when he moved from intellectual comprehension to genuine appreciation for what had been accomplished. 4,735 meters, he said aloud. as if saying the distance would make it more real. The bullet was in the air for approximately 6.2 seconds. In that time, gravity pulled it down by approximately 480 inches. Wind pushed it sideways by an amount that would have been impossible to calculate without computer assistance. And you made the shot. We made the shot, Sarah corrected. Major Walsh was integral to the wind monitoring and real-time data collection. Without his observations, my execution would not have been possible. Matthew nodded, acknowledging the correction. The ballistics team has been analyzing the methodology. They're saying that what you did has implications that extend far beyond this single operation. They're suggesting that with training and practice, other shooters could replicate this capability. That was always the goal, Sarah said. Any capability that depends on a single operator is a vulnerability. The goal was to prove the distance was achievable, to document the methodology, and to create a framework that other shooters could follow. Which brings me to why I wanted to meet with you, Matthew said. He leaned back in his chair, and Sarah noticed that he looked tired. The kind of tired that came from being responsible for operations that affected lives and reputations and military doctrine. The military is establishing a specialized unit focused on extreme-range precision operations, long-distance eliminations that would previously have been considered impossible. We want you to head the training program. She had expected commendation, perhaps, and the possibility of advancement within the normal structure of her unit. But the creation of an entirely new, specialized training program was something else entirely. It was recognition on a scale that exceeded her previous accomplishments. Sir, she said carefully, I'm honored by the offer, but I want to understand the scope of what's being requested. You're talking about establishing a formal training program. That means curriculum development, instructor training, facility designation, resources allocation. That's a significant undertaking. It is, Matthew agreed, and the military is prepared to make that undertaking. Based on what you accomplished, the shot proved that the distance is achievable. What comes next is proving that it's teachable. That's what we need from you. She thought about what it would mean to accept it. Teaching would pull her away from active operations. It would transform her from someone who executed missions into someone who prepared others to execute them. There was honor in that role, certainly, but there was also a loss of the immediacy, the direct engagement with the work that had defined her career. On the other hand, she thought about Derek's words on the mountain after the extraction, about the difference between being accepted into a unit and being respected. Respect was something that lasted. It was built on demonstrated capability and supported by the continuation of excellence. If she could establish a training program that created other operators capable of executing shots at extreme distances, that would be the kind of contribution that extended far beyond any single mission. I'll need assistance, Sarah said. Major Walsh would be my first choice as primary instructor for wind and environmental analysis, and I'll need access to ballistics experts, weapons specialists, and curriculum designers. The program can't just be me training shooters. It needs to be a complete system that documents the entire process from theory to execution. You'll have everything you need, Matthew said. Budget is not a constraint for this project. The military has decided that this capability is worth the investment. What is a constraint is time. We need the curriculum operational within 8 months. 8 months to design and implement a training program that would teach other operators how to do something that had previously been considered impossible. It was a challenging timeline, but it was not unreasonable for something this significant. Sarah left the conference room understanding that her life had fundamentally changed. She was no longer a specialized sniper who was occasionally called on for impossible missions. She had become someone responsible for creating a whole category of specialized snipers. It was a transition that would require different skills and different approaches to the work. The first thing Sarah did was request a meeting with Derek. They sat in a small office off the training facility, and Sarah explained the offer and what it would entail. This is good for you, Derek said immediately. This is what you should be doing. I'm leaving active operations, Sarah replied. I'll never make another shot like the one on the mountain. I'll be watching other people do it instead. Yes, Derek said, and you'll be showing them how to do it in a way that no one else could. You understand the methodology at a level that goes beyond just executing a single shot. You understand how to think about extreme range precision. That's a rare thing. That's something worth teaching. Sarah realized that Derek understood what she was experiencing. He had transitioned into a training and command role himself, and he had navigated that same moment where the realization hit that advancement meant moving away from the immediacy of fieldwork. "Will you help me develop the program?" she asked. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Whatever you need, I'm in." Over the next 8 months, Sarah and Derek, along with a team of specialists from various military disciplines, developed what became known as the Extreme Range Precision Program. The curriculum covered everything from advanced ballistics theory to wind pattern analysis to the psychological preparation necessary to execute a shot that would define a career. The physical training aspect was comprehensive. Sarah insisted that operators be capable of reaching shooting positions under difficult circumstances while maintaining the physical stability necessary to execute precision shots. They ran through exercises designed to develop the specific muscle groups that supported precision shooting. They trained in altitude chambers to prepare for the thin air of high-altitude operations. They learned to process environmental data in real time and to convert that data into micro-adjustments that could mean the difference between a hit and a miss. But the most important training was the conceptual training. Sarah spent hours working with operators, teaching them to think about distance in a different way. Most precision shooters learn to work at distances of 500 to 1,000 meters, the training emphasizing maintaining sight picture and managing recoil. But extreme range shots required something different. They required an understanding of the projectile's entire journey, an appreciation for the forces that would act upon it across the distance, and the ability to predict those forces accurately enough to compensate for them. The bullet, Sarah would tell the operators, doesn't care about your skill or your confidence. It responds only to the laws of physics. Your job is to understand those laws well enough that you can predict how the bullet will respond, and then adjust your setup so that the bullet's response matches your intended outcome. The first training class graduated 12 operators. Each of them had demonstrated competency at extreme distances. Each of them had successfully executed shots at ranges exceeding 4,000 meters. The success rate of the training program was 90 to 1%, which meant that some operators simply did not have the combination of skills, temperament, and analytical capability necessary to work at those distances. 3 of the 12 were women, a fact that made Sarah particularly satisfied. The military had a long history of skepticism about women in specialized combat roles. The Extreme Range Precision Program had demonstrated that gender was not a limiting factor in capability. What mattered was aptitude and commitment, and the willingness to engage with mathematics and physics at a level of precision that most people never experienced. News of Sarah's accomplishment did eventually become public, though the details were heavily classified. Military publications discussed the shot in technical terms, analyzing the ballistics and the wind calculations and the equipment involved. Broader media picked up on the story of a woman making an impossible shot, and it became one of those narratives that moved beyond the military world into popular culture. Sarah did interviews where she attempted to redirect attention away from the sensational aspects of what she had accomplished and toward the actual technical achievement. She talked about the mathematics and the training and the collaboration with Derek and the rest of the team. She talked about how the shot had been made possible not by any individual exceptionalism, but by systematic preparation and proper application of established principles. But the cultural narrative was stronger than her corrections. She had made an impossible shot, and that framing was what the public latched onto. In some circles, she became a symbol of women breaking barriers. In other circles, she became a symbol of military overreach and the expansion of technological capability in ways that some people found troubling. 2 years after the initial operation, Sarah received a visitor to her office at the training facility. It was a young woman, 19 years old, who had recently graduated from her entry-level military training and was considering what role she wanted to pursue. She had heard about the Extreme Range Precision Program, and she wanted to know what it would take to qualify. Sarah spent 2 hours with this young woman, explaining the program, the commitment it required, the challenges she would face. She did not minimize the difficulty or pretend that everyone who applied would succeed, but she also did not discourage her. Instead, she provided honest assessment of what the program demanded and allowed the young woman to make her own decision about whether she wanted to pursue it. "Can I ask you something?" the young woman said as she was leaving Sarah's office. "When you made the shot, when everyone said it was impossible, what were you thinking?" Sarah considered the question. Most interviews asked her about the technical aspects of the execution. No one had asked her what she was thinking in the moments before the trigger break. "I was thinking," Sarah said, That the word impossible is something people use when they haven't done the math. I was thinking that if the mathematics said the shot was possible, then belief became irrelevant. What mattered was execution. What mattered was treating the challenge as a problem to solve, not as a miraculous achievement that could never be replicated. "And you believed you could solve it?" the young woman asked. "I believed the mathematics had already solved it," Sarah replied. "I just needed to implement the solution." There's a difference. The young woman left, and Sarah never knew if she pursued the program or not, but she hoped she had. She hoped that this young woman would take the lesson and apply it to whatever challenges she faced. The lesson that belief in impossibility was usually just a failure of calculation, and that if you could do the math, you could do the thing. 5 years after the original operation, Sarah attended a military reception where she was being honored for her contributions to military doctrine and training. She wore her dress uniform, which included the medals she had earned over her service. There were speeches from commanding officers and members of Congress. There was press coverage and interviews and all the ceremonial aspects of public recognition. But what stayed with her afterward was a brief conversation with Derek, who found her standing alone on a balcony overlooking the city, taking a moment away from the crowd. "You changed everything," he said. "You understand that, right? When you made that shot, you changed how people think about what's possible in this profession." "I changed the methodology," Sarah corrected. "What people think about what's possible is up to them." "That's where you're wrong," Derek said. "You proved that the distance was achievable. You proved that a woman was capable of executing it. You proved that extreme range precision operations were teachable, not just exceptional talent. You changed the paradigm. Whatever comes next in long-range precision operations is going to be built on the foundation you established." Sarah understood what he was saying, and she recognized that he was right. The shot on the mountain had been just one moment in time, but it had created a ripple effect that extended far beyond that single operation. The Extreme Range Precision program was now part of military doctrine in multiple nations. The techniques she had pioneered were being studied and replicated and refined. The training framework she had developed had become the standard against which other precision shooting programs were measured. But when Sarah thought about the accomplishment, when she reflected on what the shot had meant, she did not think about the paradigm shift, or the military doctrine, or the cultural narrative. She thought about the moment when Derek had issued the challenge, and she had chosen not to accept the premise that it was impossible. She thought about the mathematics that had made it achievable. She thought about the precision and focus that had been necessary to execute it. And she thought about the understanding that had come afterward that the most significant achievements were rarely about individual exceptionalism. They were about the willingness to believe in the mathematics, to do the work, and to trust that if the numbers were right, the outcome would be as well. Years later, when military historians looked back at the evolution of precision shooting and extreme range operations, they would point to the shot at 4,735 meters as the moment when something fundamental had shifted. They would analyze the ballistics and the mathematics and the technique. They would study Sarah's training program and understand how it had transformed what the military believed to be possible. But Sarah knew something that the historians would never quite capture. The shot had not been impossible. It had only been impossible until someone believed in the mathematics hard enough to try. And once someone tried and succeeded, impossible became just another distance to measure, just another problem to solve, just another expression of the laws of physics correctly applied to a very human challenge. The mountains where the shot had been made would remain unchanged. The compound where the target had stood would eventually be reclaimed by nature. The particular configuration of wind and temperature and atmospheric conditions on that cold morning would never exist again in precisely the same way. But the knowledge that the shot was possible, that the distance could be crossed, that extreme range precision operations were teachable and replicable, that would endure. That would become part of the permanent infrastructure of military capability and training. And that, Sarah understood, was the real achievement, not the single shot, but the creation of a framework within which other shooters could learn to make that same shot. That was the legacy. That was the thing that mattered in the long term. That was why Derek had said that teaching was more important than any individual operation, no matter how significant that operation might be. Sarah had chambered around on a mountain at 4,735 meters, and she had trusted in the mathematics to carry it to its target. But she had also spent the next 5 years teaching others to do the same thing. And in that teaching, she had created something that would extend far beyond her own career and capability. That was the real miracle. Not the shot itself, but the transformation of one extraordinary moment into a permanent change in what the military understood to be possible. That was the thing that would outlast her, that would inspire others, and that would prove that the most significant achievements were rarely about the individual, but about the system that could be created, taught, and replicated to the benefit of everyone who came after.